Hello. Today's reading is Psalm number 50, verses 1 through 15. And the song goes. The mighty one, God the Lord, speaks and summons the earth from the rising of the sun to its setting. Out of Zion, the perfection of beauty, God shines forth. Our God comes and does not keep silence. Before him is a devouring fire and a mighty tempest all around him. He calls to the heavens above and to the earth that he may judge his people. Gather to me, my faithful ones, who made a covenant with me by sacrifice. The heavens declare his righteousness, for God himself is judge. Hear, O my people, and I will speak. O Israel, I will testify against you. I am God, your God. Not for your sacrifices do I rebuke you. Your burnt offerings are continually before me. I will not accept a bull from your house or goats from your folds. For every wild animal of the forest is mine, the cattle on 1,000 hills. I know all the birds of the air, and all that moves in the field is mine. If I were hungry, I would not tell you, for the world and all that is in it is mine. Do I eat the flesh of bulls or drink the blood of goats? Offer to God a sacrifice of thanksgiving, and pay your vows to the Most High. Call on me in the day of trouble. I will deliver you, and you shall glorify me. We broke off on that psalm midway through, and next week we'll get to the remainder of it. But before we dive in, I think that it bears reminding that these psalms are actually, in fact, songs, that they were a mode of expressive worship at religious and festive gatherings. And it seems just so mundane to read them as I just did. I wish I could hear them sung in their original form. They must have been very moving. And here's why I think that must be the case. Because they've been preserved year by year, century by century, and now millennia by millennia. For thousands of years, these songs have been kept carefully and remembered and repeated. Amazing Grace may seem like an old song, an old hymn, but it's a very young song when compared to these psalms. Here's what we know about Psalm 50. It is ascribed to someone named Asaph, who, it is believed, was a temple singer. We know that it was a song meant to be sung at a festival, more specifically, a covenant renewal festival. And one likely candidate is a festival called the Festival of Booths. Scholars think that this might be the festival this psalm was intended for. Well, what is this Festival of Booths? Well, Encyclopedia Britannica says this about it. Sukkot, also called Feast of Tabernacles or Feast of Booths, Sukkot, by the way, means booths, is a Jewish autumn festival of double Thanksgiving. It occurs around late September to mid-October. The festival recalls the days when the Israelites lived in huts, or sukkot, during their years of wandering in the wilderness after the exodus from Egypt. The festival is characterized by the erection of huts made of branches, with prayers of thanksgiving to God for the fruitfulness of the land. So this is a festival that remembers the time of scarcity, of wandering, and then they build temporary huts to bring them back to that place, to that time when they lived more transient lives. And here is a song that's meant to be sung at a festival of Thanksgiving, perhaps this very festival. And the people were expected to bring a sacrifice. And I think it's funny how a festival meant to help the people remember a time in the wilderness when the people could only live in temporary huts, that this kind of festival calls them to giving and to thanksgiving. You'd think that these experiences, when you remember them and bring them up, these times of scarcity, would have taught them to be more withholding, but here is a festival that calls gratitude and generosity from them. It called them to sacrifice, to give back a portion of what they had. Now, that sacrifice would consist of some food, an animal, or perhaps grain, that would be burnt as an offering to God. This was not an uncommon practice in those days in that region. It isn't as if the Israelites invented it. In fact, neighboring peoples would do similar things to their own gods. These were regional cultural practices that happened in and outside of Israel. And it was believed by many that the gods were hungry and thus required some food from the people or else. A hungry person can be a cranky person. Perhaps a hungry God is a cranky God. You might think that this is a silly idea, but I personally can recall feelings that I felt as a child when I felt especially guilty at my temptation to withhold God's cut of my weekly allowance and the money that I'd earned mowing lawns. God demanded at least 10%, I was told, perhaps more. God, to me, seemed hungry or perhaps even greedy. And if I did not give, God would be angry with me, I thought. So I better keep God fed. You can imagine a worshiper long ago reasoning that if they withheld God's cut of the livestock or the harvest, well then, the hungry God may well devour their own lives in various ways, their livelihoods, or who knows what else. The divine hand can, after all, seem so mysterious, so better keep the roast mutton coming and keep God's buffet well stocked. This may well have been the attitude of a worshiper long ago at a feast such as the one Psalm 50 is meant to commemorate. Imagine walking into the holy place, offering in tow, and then it starts. The music, the song. Asaph begins to sing his song. Its lyrics suggest a God of majesty, a God of splendid beauty and grandeur. In the opening lines of this psalm, Psalm 50, God is described as the mighty one, the one whose voice summons the whole earth. This God is on the way. This God's radiance is not revealed from afar, but out of the holy city, Zion. So here is a God who draws near to the people, whose beauty is reflected in the piety of the community as they gather. The psalmist describes a God who speaks, then speaks into the community. And when this God speaks, the words burn like fire and move like a storm. This God calls the heavens and the earth together and is about to render a judgment. So hold on. Verse 5 reads, "Gather to me, my faithful ones, who made a covenant with me by sacrifice. The heavens declare his righteousness, for God himself is judge." As the singer sings these words, our self-conscious worshiper wonders if the sacrifice they've brought will pass muster. Will the hungry God be satisfied? What comes to my mind in this moment is the woman who once approached me after a sermon about money and giving. I'd been preaching on these themes, and she was in tears, put to tears by my sermon, as she felt guilty at not being able to give enough. She was giving what she felt she could, she said, but was it enough? Is what I brought enough to satiate the desires of a hungry God? After musing on these things, the worshiper's attention is brought back into the sanctuary. Next there is silence. Then the oracle speaks the very words of God. Verse 7, "Hear, O my people, and I will speak, O Israel. I will testify against you." And at those words, your stomach tightens. This hungry God is hangry. It goes on, "I am your God, your God. Not for your sacrifices do I rebuke you. Your burnt offerings are continually before me. I will not accept a bull from your house or goats from your folds? Right then, those words give rise to confusion. I mean, what gives? God, didn't you just say that our offerings are ever before you? An endless buffet of food for an apparently hungry God? Seems like we've brought more than enough, but what we brought still will not be accepted? What on earth does this God want? Well, it continues. For every wild animal of the forest is mine, the cattle on 1,000 hills. I know all the birds of the air, and all that moves in the field is mine. If I were hungry, I would not tell you, for the world and all that is in it is mine. Do I eat the flesh of bulls or drink the blood of goats? It's an age-old problem, really. What gift do you give someone who has everything? Or in this case, what do you give the God who has everything? Turns out, God is not hungry. God has enough already. The animals the people brought for sacrifice, already God's. The birds in the air, one wouldn't even attempt to catch for God because you can't. Well, no need anyway. God has those too. Not hungry, says God, for all the world and all that is in it is mine. I don't need your sacrifices. So you stand there with your sacrifice completely at a loss. If God doesn't need these things we've brought, then what are we even doing here? And why is God so upset? What are we missing? Here it is. Asaph sings, and these words come as relief. Verse 14. Offer to God a sacrifice of thanksgiving, and pay your vows to the Most High. Call on me in the day of trouble. I will deliver you, and you shall glorify me. God doesn't need our sacrifices, but we need to give them for our very lives. Here we are invited to hold our possessions with an open hand, and even to be willing to give them back into the world so that others might be blessed just as we have been blessed. This process that the psalmist is inviting us into calls us to account for what we've been given by the God who has everything already, to acknowledge this in deep gratitude, and then to let it go so that we can experience what it is like to bless the world just as God has blessed it. God gives us the rain, the sun, the earth, and many things besides. Now, we have an opportunity to experience the joy God feels in the giving. We are called to this practice, not because God is hungry, but because it forms in us new hearts and new perspectives, and in the process, we are filled in the ways that matter the most. The 50th Psalm invites us into a deeper relationship of trust with the one who has given us all that we possess. We give back part of what we've been given to discover that the divine gift giver will continue to sustain us even as we give, something we would never have discovered if we'd been withholding, or something this people who had spent time in the wilderness never would have discovered if they had become jaded by the experience. We release the good things that we've been given back into the community only to see them blossom and bloom into new life all around us. And this new life nourishes us and blesses us even more. Somehow, on the other side of letting go, we've found ourselves possessors of even more. This has been my experience. More life, more community, and more hope for a future as we see lives changed by our generosity. When we do this, our relationship and trust in God deepens, and our relationship and trust in community deepens. When we release it back into creation. We acknowledge that the God who has given us these things will remain faithful to us. It's a testimony, really. Week by week, year by year, we give only to discover that we continue to have enough. God continues to bless. The people of Israel would learn by the process that the God to whom they sacrificed continued to carry them even as they gave back the good things God had given. The God who had given them manna in the desert continued to be a giver of life and good things. And as we move through cycles of giving, feast, and thanksgiving, lives are changed by our gifts all around us. And this in and of itself is a blessing, a gift back to us. People are fed spiritually and physically. Our generosity creates more and more space at the tables where these good things are enjoyed. Those who are fed now have the space to consider how they might join this feast, this season of Thanksgiving alongside of us, this season of giving and of blessing others. Here, we are answering the call to express our deep gratitude for the various ways we've been blessed by our Creator, the giver of life, and then to pay forward that blessing for others to enjoy. Then they will bless others in turn, cycles upon cycles of blessing. Pretty soon, everyone is on the receiving end of some wonderful gift given by someone, a sister or brother, in gratitude in the community. We all make off well in the end when we are all generous together. This is the perfect time of year to be thinking about these things. It's early November, so our national holiday of Thanksgiving is just around the corner. And in that spirit, Northwood is entering into a month of fundraising and discernment, what to do with the good things God has given us. And every year we go through this process cyclically, and we assess what we have to be thankful for, and with an eye into the future, we consider what we might do with these good things we've been given to bless others. And so we ask our people, all of us, to consider how we might continue to support our church and our ministry so that we in turn can sow seeds of blessing for others. This year, we are shaping our future budget with the assumption that we will be developing ministries for young people, school-aged to middle school. That's our focus. We expect to broaden it in the future, but for now, that's it. Children, grades kindergarten through 8th grade. And in asking for your support in this, we are not asking you to feed a hungry God, but rather hungry children, hungry for knowledge, hungry for wisdom, and hungry to learn about God's love. So no, God is not hungry, but we are, as are many others. Hungry for change, hungry for purpose, hungry for life and love and everything good. Paradoxically, the way forward is found in our ability to let go, to give back what we've got for the life of the world, or to end with a quote from Proverbs 11, verse 25. A generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. May we be refreshed.